wind cut through the night like a whispered warning. As I approached the old Blythe estate, its silhouette hunched and brooding against the storm-dark sky. I had heard the stories for as long as I could remember, of the family that once thrived with wealth and influence, only to vanish under a shadow that no living soul could explain. Local folklore called it a curse, a ritual so ancient and malevolent that even speaking of it invited danger. The estate had long been abandoned, its windows staring blankly into the darkness like dead eyes, and yet, standing at its gates, I felt an almost magnetic pull, as if the house itself were inviting me to witness what no one had lived to describe. I stepped over the rusted gates, the iron shrieking under my touch, and the scent of decayed wood and mold filled my lungs. The stories had always painted the Blythe as an ordinary family, then as an extraordinary one, and finally as victims of something that defied explanation. Some claimed the ritual had been performed centuries ago, yet its consequences stretched like shadows across generations, leaving behind whispers of madness, disappearance, and death. The estate loomed over me, a testament to grandeur turned ruin, and with every step toward the threshold, my pulse quickened. What lay inside was not merely history, it was the manifestation of a darkness that had survived long after the family itself had disappeared. The front door, swollen with moisture and age, yielded with a reluctant groan. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with centuries of neglect. Dust motes floated like ghostly dancers in the beams of my flashlight, and the faint smell of incense lingered as though someone or something had prepared the house for a ceremony that had never ended. The walls were lined with portraits of the Blythes, their eyes unnervingly lifelike, and I felt them watching me as I moved deeper into the foyer. Each painting told a story of wealth, pride, and careful appearances, masking a darkness that only the initiated could perceive. It was in the library that I found the first tangible clue, a collection of journals stacked neatly despite the decay around them. The pages were yellowed, brittle, but the ink was remarkably preserved. The first entry I opened bore the date of 1832, and the handwriting was precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The ceremony must be performed, it began, to preserve the family's honor, to protect our line from forces that would see it undone. The blood must be offered willingly, and the words spoken with intent. Without it, the family is doomed to fracture and fade. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. Each entry detailed preparations, incantations, and accounts of offerings made in secrecy. It became chillingly clear that the Blythes had not merely practiced superstition, they had believed in the potency of the ritual with the intensity of those who dare to play with forces beyond comprehension. As I read, I discovered references to an object, a talisman, hidden somewhere within the estate. Its purpose was never fully explained, only hinted at. It was said to anchor the ritual, binding the family's fortune, influence, and life itself to its power. Those who possessed the talisman held the key to survival. Those who did not were doomed, and yet with every generation, the notes implied that something went wrong. Mistakes, miscalculations, and perhaps defiance had disrupted the ritual's balance, unleashing consequences that escalated beyond comprehension. The family's decline, the disappearances, the madness, these were not accidents. They were the inevitable results of a ceremony that had been corrupted, misunderstood, or incomplete. I moved deeper into the house, my flashlight flickering across walls and furniture frozen in time. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its railings carved with motifs that seemed benign at first, but closer inspection revealed symbols of binding, protection, and offering. It was as though the architects had designed every element to channel energy, to guide intention, and to safeguard secret. Each room told a fragment of the story. The dining hall still set as if awaiting guests, the children's nursery frozen in quiet terror, The master bedroom containing a small altar, covered in dust. Candles once used for illumination, now rested as silent witnesses to rituals whose echoes refused to fade. The storm outside intensified, the wind rattling the shutters and making the house tremble as if alive. Lightning illuminated the talisman briefly, tucked in a hidden alcove beneath the master staircase. It was a small object, carved of dark wood and etched with symbols that defied logical interpretation. As I reached for it, I felt a wave of unease, a sudden pressure on my chest that made breathing difficult. The air thickened, the shadows seemed to converge, and for a moment, I swore I heard the voices of the Blythes themselves murmuring, chanting one. I withdrew my hand, shaking, my mind racing with the knowledge that this artifact had been the linchpin of a centuries-old curse. Its presence explained the family's ruin, their obsession, and the fear that had clung to their bloodline long after death. I spent hours documenting, photographing, and carefully examining every journal, symbol, and object I could find. The pattern was unmistakable. The ritual demanded precise timing, intention, and execution. Any deviation led to catastrophe. Generations had tried and failed, the consequences cascading across centuries. Families had vanished, heirs had gone mad, and some had died in unexplained accidents, their fates echoing the warnings written meticulously in the journal. I realized with a sinking sense of awe that what I was witnessing was not superstition, it was the calculated unfolding of an ancient practice, one that blurred the line between belief and reality, intention and consequence. By the time I descended into the basement, the storm had reached its peak, hammering against the roof and walls with relentless force. There in the darkest corner, I found remnants of previous ceremonies, ash, candles, and scattered offerings that had long since decayed. A large circle etched into the floor suggested the final space where the ritual had been completed, or where it had failed most catastrophically. The air was suffocating, the shadows seemed alive, and I understood, viscerally, that this was the epicenter of the Blythe's ruin. Every generation's misstep, every corrupted incantation, every misaligned offering, had originated here, radiating outward like ripples across time, consuming lives, sanity, and inheritance. As dawn approached, the storm began to abate, leaving behind a silence that was almost unbearable. I stepped outside, carrying the talisman and the journals, my mind heavy with the enormity of what I had uncovered. The Blythe family's destruction had not been the result of misfortune, but of a deliberate, ancient force bound in ritual, belief, and consequence. Their story, once obscured by myth, was now clear, terrifying in its clarity, and yet strangely compelling. The bloodline had been destroyed, not by violence, disease, or accident, but by the deliberate hand of tradition and the relentless force of an ancient ritual that demanded perfection in execution, something the Blythes could never achieve. The estate faded behind me, but the weight of the story lingered. I understood, fully, that the Blythe family's legacy was not one of wealth, power, or prestige, but a cautionary tale of obsession, meticulous design, and the consequences of meddling with forces that even the most intelligent minds cannot control. I walked away, knowing that the darkness I carried in my mind would never fully leave, and that the story I had uncovered would haunt me as surely as it had haunted the generations of Blythes before me. The morning after my first night at the Blythe estate carried an unsettling quiet, the kind that presses against your ears and whispers that nothing will ever be the same. I returned to the house, compelled to explore further, to understand the depths of the darkness that had consumed the Blythes over generation. The journals I had taken from the library were spread across the floor of the study, each open page revealing a layer of obsession, paranoia, and ritualistic obsession I could scarcely comprehend. The family had not simply performed a ritual, they had lived within it, breathed it, allowed it to define their every action, every decision, every hope. The second generation's notes were the most chilling. They described children indoctrinated from birth to participate in ceremonies they could not understand, yet whose failure would bring calamity. There was meticulous detail regarding the timing of the moon, the alignment of candles, and the recitation of incantations that required precision down to the second. The Blythes had been relentless, calculating, and completely devoted to an abstract force they referred to simply as the Guardian. But as I read, it became clear that this Guardian was not benevolent. It demanded compliance, obedience, and sacrifice, and when the family faltered, it punished them without mercy. One journal described the fate of Eliza Blythe, the eldest daughter of the second generation, who had been left alone in the nursery during a ceremony gone awry. The writing was frantic, almost illegible in places, recounting how Eliza had screamed, how the candles had extinguished themselves, and how a presence, something unseen but palpably malevolent, had entered the room. The account ended abruptly, with a single sentence scrawled across the page: "She will never awaken. The Guardian claims what is owed." There was no other explanation, no follow-up, just the cold acceptance of the child's disappearance as a matter-of-fact outcome of ritual failure. I wandered through the corridors, tracing the footsteps of the family who had once walked these halls with purpose and dread. The rooms all bore the weight of history, the furniture positioned as though awaiting the return of lives long extinguished. I noticed that each generation of the Blythes had modified the estate slightly, adding secret alcoves, false walls, and hidden compartments to accommodate the ritual. It was as if the house itself had become a participant, reshaped to channel power, amplify intent, and ensure obedience. Even the smallest architectural details, a carved doorknob, a particular placement of a beam, served a purpose beyond what a casual observer could perceive. The journals also chronicled the social consequences of the ritual. Family members who failed, who resisted, or who questioned the necessity of the practices were gradually isolated, shunned, and sometimes eliminated entirely. Letters to friends outside the family were few, and those that existed were filled with vague references to illness, misfortune, and travel. There was no mention of disappearance, madness, or death. The Blythes had maintained appearances meticulously, hiding their failures behind a veneer of respectability, while inside, the ritual demanded increasingly brutal compliance. By mid-afternoon, I descended to the basement again, compelled to examine the circle where generations had attempted to anchor the ritual. The space was oppressive, the shadows heavy and clinging, as though they were waiting for me to make a mistake. I examined the etchings on the floor more closely, realizing that each mark corresponded to a specific generation, a line of energy or intention channeled through the lives of the family members. The ritual was cumulative, its failure compounded across centuries, each misalignment, each misstep, feeding the Guardian's appetite. There was no redemption, no correction, only the relentless enforcement of its own rules. One passage in the journal caught my attention. It was dated 1865, and described a failed attempt by the third generation to adjust the ritual in order to accommodate new family members who had been born prematurely. The language was almost clinical, yet the fear radiated from the words. We attempted to modify the sequence. We adjusted the placement of the candles, recalibrated the timing, and yet the Guardian does not accept deviation. The child shrieks, the air thickens, and we are paralyzed. The lines of intent unravel, the consequences immediate and severe. That evening the child vanished, and the family reported nothing to the outside world. Each generation's mistakes were absorbed into the estate, their echoes lingering in the wood, the stone, and the very air. I moved upstairs to the main hall, where the family had gathered for a final documented ceremony in 19. The journal was almost poetic in its description, detailing how the family members, aware of impending disaster, clutched the talisman, circled the altar, and chanted the incantations with desperation bordering on madness. There was an urgency to their words, a fear that the Guardian would consume them entirely, and indeed, the outcome was catastrophic. The youngest of the family vanished first, followed by the elder. By the following morning,
The estate was empty, save for a single entry noting, "The Guardian takes all who fail. Our bloodline is broken, none remain." The ritual had achieved what it was designed to do, but not as intended. The punishment had exceeded any conceivable measure. As night fell once more, I found myself reflecting on the implications of what I had uncovered. The Blythes had not been cursed by fate or ill fortune. They had been caught in a meticulously structured, ancient mechanism that demanded perfection and compliance. The ritual's design was such that deviation was fatal, and the family had been incapable of sustaining it across generations. Their ambition, pride, and desire for survival had been weaponized against them. The estate, the journals, the talisman, all were remnants of a system that functioned according to its own merciless logic. The final revelation came when I discovered a ledger, hidden beneath the floorboards of the attic. It contained detailed accounts of the family's finances, social dealings, and the cost of maintaining the rituals. What struck me most was the obsessive level of accounting, the precise calculation of resources, time, and energy devoted to the ceremony. The Blythes had invested their wealth, reputation, and lives in service of a ritual they barely understood, yet could not escape. Every decision, every expenditure, every interaction was informed by the fear of the Guardian, creating a self-sustaining cycle of obsession and decline. I left the Blythe estate as dawn broke, the sky a muted gray, the wind carrying with it the lingering weight of centuries of fear and compliance. In my mind, the story of the Blythes was no longer a mere legend. It was a lesson in the peril of obsession, the danger of rigid adherence to unknown forces, and the devastating consequences of generations bound by ritual and fear. The talisman and the journals, now in my possession, bore witness to lives extinguished, opportunities squandered, and a bloodline destroyed by a mechanism that demanded nothing less than perfection. The third generation's downfall was not sudden. It had been brewing quietly, a tension hidden beneath the polite facades of family gatherings and social calls. The journals revealed that the Blythes were aware, even then, that the ritual was exacting a toll, yet pride and fear of the Guardian compelled them to continue. Each family member was weighed down by the knowledge that a single misstep could doom them, and the psychological strain manifested in subtle, terrifying ways. Insomnia became common. Faces grew pale and drawn, and conversations often ended abruptly, as though words themselves could summon the Guardian's attention. I spent hours examining the personal letters of the Blythes from 1920 through 1940. They described ordinary life on the surface, but between the lines lay desperation. One letter, written by a young woman named Catherine Blythe, recounted her fears for her younger siblings. "I cannot watch them perform the chants any longer," she wrote. "The candles flare and die as if the room itself breathes against us. When we miss a step, even slightly, I see it in the shadows. The Guardian moves, unseen but present. We are trapped, and yet no one outside knows." The language was restrained, almost clinical, yet every word carried a weight that made the hairs on my arms rise. I traced the family's lineage, and noticed an alarming pattern. Those who resisted the ritual, or even questioned it in private, tended to vanish mysteriously within months. It was never recorded publicly, always disguised as travel, illness, or relocation. The Guardian's reach, it seemed, extended beyond the ritual's physical enactment. Even the thought of defiance was punished. The journals hinted at whispered warnings, notes scratched in the margins, all suggesting that fear itself had become a tool of control, binding the family to generations of compliance. One particular diary entry stood out, dated 1920. It described a failed attempt to adapt the ritual to modern life. The family had tried to adjust the timing, to synchronize it with artificial lighting rather than the natural cycles of the moon. "The Guardian does not bend for innovation." The entry: "The candles sputter, the floorboards groan, and the air grows thick with malice. We falter, and the consequence is immediate." A scream pierced the night. "The child is gone. None can resist." It was as though the ritual was a living entity, reactive and unforgiving, capable of enforcing its will without mercy. Walking through the estate, I could feel the residual tension, as though the walls themselves remembered each misstep, each failure, each act of defiance. The house was not simply a building, it was a participant, a silent observer, and a warden all at once. Each room had been carefully prepared to facilitate the ritual. Markings on the floor, strategically placed mirrors, and hidden compartments for talismans and offerings. Even the air seemed charged with the energy of generations who had lived, and often died, under the strict rule of an unseen authority. The journals of this period also detailed the increasing paranoia within the family. Members would not meet in private without fear of being overheard, would not speak freely to each other, and often avoided eye contact. During ceremonies, the guardian, they believed, could detect hesitation, doubt, or distraction. It was not enough to perform the ritual. One had to perform it with unwavering conviction. Any lapse, any doubt would be punished, sometimes immediately, sometimes in a manner that slowly eroded the mind and body over weeks or months. I uncovered correspondence between family members that revealed attempts to seek help from outsiders, a desperate effort to escape the cycle. One letter, addressed to a distant cousin in another city, pleaded for intervention. "We are bound. The guardian watches us, and the rituals will not cease until our line is cleansed. We beg for guidance for anything that can free us, but we fear it is too late. The house itself conspires with it. Our steps are monitored, our words recorded. There is no refuge." The cousin never responded, or if they did, no reply survives. The letters ended, as if the family understood, even then, that outside interference was futile against a mechanism that transcended human control. I descended into the hidden chambers beneath the main hall where the third generation had gathered for their most critical rituals. The room was smaller than I expected, dimly lit by the faint glow of aged candle stubs, yet it radiated a sense of profound oppression. The floor was marked with lines and symbols, meticulously drawn, each corresponding to a member of the family. I could see the cumulative impact of generations of ritual. The marks were darker and deeper here, as though etched with intent over decades. This chamber had been the site of both reverence and terror, where obedience and failure were measured with brutal precision. The journals described the final documented ritual of this generation. In 1932, the family had attempted to reconcile the old ways with new circumstances, incorporating younger members and adjusting the schedule to accommodate modern life. They had not succeeded. The account described a crescendo of fear, the candles flickering, the air trembling with unspoken menace. One by one, the participants faltered, their concentration broken by fatigue, fear, or doubt. The guardian exacted its judgment swiftly. The youngest child disappeared first, followed by a teenager, leaving only the eldest to witness the devastation.
I lingered in the chamber long after nightfall, absorbing the weight of what had transpired. The ritual was more than a family tradition. It was a system of control that had become self-perpetuating, a mechanism that demanded perfection, punished deviation, and ultimately destroyed those it touched. The Blythes were not merely victims of circumstance. They were prisoners of their own devotion, their lives and souls woven into a tapestry of fear that could not be unraveled. By the time I left the basement, I realized that understanding the ritual required more than reading the journals. It required empathy for the terror that bound the family, insight into the psychological forces that shaped generations, and recognition of the profound consequences of a mechanism that operated beyond human comprehension. The Blythes had sacrificed everything: love, freedom, sanity, and life itself, to a structure that demanded absolute obedience. As I returned to the study to organize my notes, I felt the persistent, chilling sense that the guardian's presence lingered, a shadow over the estate and the minds of anyone who dared to uncover its history. The lessons of the third generation were clear: deviation, hesitation, or inquiry could invite calamity, and even knowledge alone was insufficient protection. The Blythes had endured centuries of fear, each generation reinforcing the next, and the legacy of that terror remained palpable in the silence of the house. The evening air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the Blythe estate stood like a monument to forgotten despair. Even the wind seemed hesitant as it wound through the twisted branches of the ancient trees surrounding the manor, carrying whispers of secrets too cruel to speak aloud. I walked slowly along the cracked cobblestone path that led to the garden at the rear of the house, my footsteps swallowed by shadows, each one echoing a memory I wasn't ready to face. This garden, once vibrant with roses and lilies, was now a graveyard of wilted blooms, their petals blackened by some unseen force, as if the earth itself mourned the tragedies buried within its soil. The windows of the manor glowed faintly with the reflection of the dying sun, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Inside, I could sense the weight of generations pressing down on me, a suffocating presence that seemed to move through the air like smoke. The Blythes had always spoken of their ancestry with pride, tales of wealth, influence and power stretching back for centuries. But the reality was far darker, a labyrinth of obsession, fear, and ritual that had claimed lives before they were even fully lived. And now, in the quiet of the afternoon, I understood the reason for their fear, the reason no one spoke of the nights that came before the sun. I paused beside the old fountain at the garden's center, its waters stagnant and black, reflecting the twisted shapes of the skeletal trees above. There were markings etched into the stone, symbols that no living person could have created, or at least none that I had ever learned. They were angular and deliberate, arranged in patterns that seemed to pulse faintly, as if the stone itself were alive. My fingers trembled as I traced one of the carvings, a deep groove in the shape of a serpent coiled around a crescent. Legends spoke of the ritual, performed under the blood moon, a ceremony designed to protect the family from outsiders, yet it had never been meant for mercy. It demanded sacrifice, and the blood it claimed was never forgotten. I had heard whispers from the villagers who lived on the edge of the estate's land. They spoke of the Blythes with a mixture of fear and fascination, describing sounds that came in the night: faint chanting, the echo of footsteps across empty halls, doors opening and closing with no one there to move them. Some claimed they had seen figures in black robes wandering the gardens, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, shadows stretching unnaturally long, as if the night itself obeyed them. These were dismissed as stories told to frighten children, but as I stood in the silent garden, I understood that fear is never born from nothing. It is the echo of truth, resonating through the fragile human imagination. The house had not changed in outward appearance, but every detail seemed infused with a hidden malice. The walls were lined with portraits of stern faces, the paint darkened with age, eyes that seemed to follow anyone who dared to move. They were ancestors who had performed the ritual, guardians of the secret that had doomed them all. Each face was frozen in a silent scream, mouths slightly parted, as if trying to warn me, eyes wide with terror or perhaps knowledge too heavy to carry in life. It was as if the very essence of the ritual had seeped into the walls, binding the past to the present, ensuring that no one could leave unscathed. And in that moment, I realized that curiosity is never innocent. It carries a price, often measured in blood and time. I wandered through the hallways, each room a testament to the lives destroyed by secrecy. Dust-covered furniture sagged under invisible weight, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. I passed the library, where ancient tomes lay scattered, their pages yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible to those who dared. One book caught my attention, bound in black leather with a lock shaped like a skull. It was not the text inside that was important. It was the pattern on the cover, identical to the symbols in the garden. My pulse quickened as I realized the connection. The ritual was not just a memory. It was a guide, a map that linked generations, ensuring that its influence never ended. Those who attempted to destroy it had vanished, swallowed by the very knowledge they sought to uncover. The dining hall told a different story, one of abundance turned grotesque, silverware tarnished, plates cracked and caked with long-dried remnants of meals, the remnants of celebrations now corrupted into symbols of loss.
Above the fireplace, a portrait of the family patriarch stared down at me. His face was stern, the eyes cold, and his hand rested over a ceremonial dagger, the blade gleaming despite the centuries that had passed. It was said he had performed the ritual first, sealing the curse into the bloodline, ensuring that no Blythe would ever escape the weight of their ancestry. Every detail of the room reinforced a chilling truth. This house was alive in a way that went beyond the physical, and it held the souls of those who had been consumed, watching, waiting, guiding, punishing. By the time night had fallen, the shadows had grown longer, the house more oppressive. I felt eyes on me constantly, though I could see no one. In the corners of the hallways, silhouettes shifted and disappeared the instant I looked directly at them. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, carrying whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I had expected to feel fear, but what I felt was something older, a cold certainty that the Blythe family's story could never end. The ritual had woven itself into the very essence of the estate, and its influence would not be broken by mere curiosity. It had survived centuries, claiming those who dared to uncover it, binding them to a history no one was allowed to remember, except through fragmented whispers like the ones that had led me here. And so I left the garden, leaving the fountain and its serpentine carvings behind. But the house did not release me entirely. It lingered in my vision, in my thoughts, a shadow stretching into every corner of my mind. The Blythe's legacy was one of blood and secrecy, a dark inheritance passed down through generations, unbroken and unrelenting. I understood then that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, some doors never meant to be opened. The ancient ritual had not ended. It had merely waited for the next witness, the next curious soul to continue the cycle. And as I walked away, I knew that its shadow would follow me, unseen but inescapable, a reminder that the past never truly dies. It only waits, patiently, for those foolish enough to awaken it. The night had deepened into a velvet black that seemed almost tangible, pressing against the walls of the Blythe estate like a living thing. I returned to the manor under the cover of darkness, each step along the crumbling path echoing with a hollow resonance that made me flinch. The trees whispered warnings I could not decipher, their skeletal branches scraping against one another like the fingers of the dead. The ritual's power was no longer a distant story. It pulsed beneath my feet, reverberating through the very ground of the estate, a heartbeat older than any of the living. I could feel it in my chest, a rhythm not my own, urging me forward, daring me to discover the parts of the past that were meant to remain buried. The front doors of the house groaned as I pushed them open, the sound filling the empty hallways with a mournful lament. Candles had long since burned out here, leaving only darkness that seemed to have a texture, thick and almost suffocating. As I moved cautiously through the grand entryway, the portraits on the walls appeared almost to shift, the eyes of the Blythes watching me, following me, judging. I had read accounts of their power, the obsession with preserving the family line, and the sacrifices demanded of each generation. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the feeling of being surrounded by a presence older than memory, a consciousness entwined with the very stones and wood of the manor itself. I found myself drawn to the west wing, a place even the oldest of the villagers refused to name. The air there was colder, the shadows deeper, as if the wing existed in a realm of its own. Each room told a story of despair, decayed furniture, shattered glass, and the remnants of a family that had once lived in comfort, now reduced to whispers and ash. My gaze fell upon a small study at the end of the hallway. Its door was ajar, a faint light spilling out from within, though no candle burned there. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves heavy with leather-bound journals, their spines etched with symbols I did not recognize but somehow understood instinctively. These were the private records of the Blythes, chronicling not only their lineage but the details of the ritual that had cursed them for centuries. As I approached the central desk, a chill ran down my spine. Papers were scattered across the surface, covered in writing that seemed to twist and shimmer in the dim light. Some pages were diagrams of the ritual itself, circles inscribed with cryptic symbols, lines connecting stars in constellations long forgotten, arrows pointing to altars and chambers hidden beneath the estate. Others were letters, faded and brittle, addressed to members of the family, their words pleading, warning, and in some cases confessing the sins they could never undo. It became clear that the ritual had not been a one-time event. It had evolved, grown more potent, feeding upon the fears and misdeeds of each generation. Each Blythe had added to the darkness, and each had been consumed by it in turn. I turned a page and found the name of a child, barely 9 years old, who had disappeared without a trace. The account was meticulous. The timing, the incantations, the ceremonial blade, all detailed with an eerie precision. It spoke of a power that demanded obedience, a force that could not be resisted without consequence. The ritual had been designed to safeguard the family, to ensure survival against threats both imagined and real. But it required blood, always blood, and the blood it demanded was never that of strangers. It came from those closest to the family, those whose trust and innocence made the offering potent. I shivered, realizing that the missing children, the vanished spouses, the untimely deaths, were all threads in a tapestry too horrific to fully comprehend. Moving deeper into the study, I discovered a hidden compartment in the floor, cleverly disguised beneath a faded rug. Inside lay an assortment of artifacts, a dagger whose handle was carved from a single piece of black bone, a small vial of crimson liquid, and a scroll wrapped in silk that seemed to hum faintly in my hand. I dared not open it at first, the air around me thickening as though warning me of the consequences. When I finally unrolled the parchment, I found a diagram of the estate, overlaid with symbols identical to those in the garden and etched into the fountain. Lines radiated outward from the central hall, connecting every room, every chamber, every secret passage beneath the house. The ritual was not bound to a single location. It encompassed the entire estate, binding the very walls to the curse, ensuring that no Blythe could escape, not even in death.
Suddenly, a sound startled me, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, as if someone or something was breathing behind me. I spun around, but the study was empty, yet the presence lingered, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe, a weight on my shoulders that was invisible yet undeniable. I understood then that the estate itself was alive, a guardian of the ritual, feeding on the fear and curiosity of those who dared to explore it. The Blythes had not been reckless. They had understood the depth of the power they wielded, and in their arrogance they had become prisoners of it. Every generation had added to the strength of the curse, unaware that it had become a force greater than any one person, a legacy that demanded continuation. I spent hours poring over the journals and artifacts, each discovery more disturbing than the last. There were accounts of secret chambers where rituals were performed, altars hidden beneath floorboards, and symbols carved into the beams of the ceiling that could only be seen from specific angles. There were letters detailing the mental toll on those who participated, the paranoia, the sleepless nights, the unrelenting fear that something unseen would claim them if they faltered. The more I read, the clearer it became that the Blythes had not only been destroyed by the ritual, they had been transformed, their humanity eroded until only the mechanics of the curse remained. By the time I left the West Wing, dawn was breaking, casting a cold light over the estate. The house seemed quieter now, but the silence was suffocating, full of expectation and menace. I understood that my presence had been noted, that the estate had already marked me as part of its story, just as it had done with countless others before me. The ritual's reach extended far beyond the walls, beyond time itself, waiting for the next generation, the next curious soul to step into its web. And I knew that leaving the estate did not mean escaping it. Sergio would follow me, a reminder that some curses are eternal, bound not to flesh, but to the very essence of a place, to the blood and fear of those who dared to uncover its secret. The first rays of sunlight barely pierced the dense fog that clung to the Blythe estate, and yet, even in this fragile light, the house seemed to watch me,
its gaze heavier than any human's could be. I had spent the previous night combing through the West Wing, uncovering secrets that should have stayed buried. And now, as I stepped outside, the garden that once appeared serene looked sinister, as if every leaf and shadow had conspired to hide the truth from prying eyes. A chill ran through me as I realized the estate was not just a collection of walls and rooms. It was a living entity, a vessel of memory, fear and malice. Every stone, every creaking floorboard, held fragments of the Blythe's tragic history. Fragments that had been carefully preserved by the very ritual that had destroyed them. I approached the central fountain, long since dry and cracked, its marble surface etched with symbols that now revealed themselves under the soft light of dawn. The pattern spiraled outward like a vortex, drawing the eye, and I imagined the soul of anyone who dared to linger too long. Each engraving corresponded to a family member, a marker of their obedience or their failure, their sacrifice or their demise. I traced my fingers over the cold marble, feeling a connection not just to the Blythes, but to the invisible force that had shaped their fate. It was as though the ritual had extended its grasp beyond bloodlines, reaching for anyone who sought to understand it, to witness the truth of the curse. And I knew then that my own curiosity had bound me to the estate in ways I had yet to comprehend. As I wandered the overgrown paths, I found the remnants of the family's once grand orchard, now wild and among the twisted branches and rotting fruit. I discovered signs of the ritual's persistence, strange arrangements of stones, the remains of fire pits, and symbols carved into the bark of trees. Each marking was precise, deliberate, a testament to the meticulous care the Blythes had taken to preserve their legacy of fear. I could almost hear their voices, whispers carried by the wind, reciting chants and incantations that had not been spoken aloud for decades. And yet, the power lingered, as palpable as the morning mist that clung to the ground. I realized that the estate itself had become a guardian, an entity that ensured the continuity of the curse regardless of who remained alive or who had vanished. The manor's east wing had been untouched by my previous explorations, and I felt a compulsive pull toward it. The corridor leading there was narrow, lined with faded tapestries depicting scenes of prosperity and triumph. Yet their colors were muted by dust and time. I could sense the energy in the walls shifting as I walked, a subtle vibration that resonated with the memory of every Blythe who had passed through these halls. Each step I took seemed to echo the past, the sound of my boots mingling with imagined whispers of the long-dead family members, recounting their obedience, their rebellion, and their fear. The air grew heavier, almost tangible, pressing against my chest and making each breath a conscious effort. It was here, in this neglected wing, that the deeper layers of the curse revealed themselves. Inside a library that had once been the pride of the estate, I found shelves upon shelves of books, many of them decayed, the pages yellowed and brittle. But interspersed among the historical tomes and religious texts were journals written in the precise, meticulous handwriting of the Blythes themselves. I opened one at random, and immediately felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon me. The entries were confessions, pleas and observations, chronicling the impact of the ritual on each generation. There were accounts of children taken in the dead of night, of spouses who vanished without explanation, and of those who had tried to resist only to be consumed by the invisible force that the family had conjured. Each page was a testament to the meticulous and cruel intelligence behind the ritual, the way it had evolved to ensure the family's survival at any cost. One journal, in particular, stood out. Its pages detailed the effects of the ritual beyond mere physical disappearance. It spoke of psychological control, of fear so profound that it reshaped the minds of the living, bending them to the will of the ritual. The Blythes had understood, perhaps too late, that the curse was not simply a means to an end. It had become an entity of its own, learning and adapting, punishing those who tried to deviate, rewarding those who obeyed. The writings described family gatherings, where members would sit in silence, aware that the ritual's presence was watching, judging. Even laughter and joy were tainted. A fragile illusion overlaid with the subtle terror that the ritual demanded compliance. The cursed lineage had not been merely destroyed. It had been enslaved to the very power it sought to harness. I descended a narrow staircase that led to the sub-basement, a place of damp stone walls and shadows that seemed to writhe in the corner. Here, I found artifacts that had been hidden for generations. Ceremonial daggers, vials of darkened liquid, and fragments of parchment that bore symbols I had yet to decipher fully. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and I could feel a faint thrum beneath my feet, as if the foundation itself were alive, pulsing with the accumulated power of countless rituals. I realized that the Blythes had not merely performed these ceremonies. They had become part of them, each action a brick in the architecture of the curse, each life a thread in the fabric that bound the estate together. To disturb this sanctum was to invite the ritual's attention, and I felt its gaze settle upon me like a tangible force. Hours passed, though time seemed meaningless. In this realm of shadows and memory, I explored room after room, documenting, reading, and sometimes simply standing still, overwhelmed by the weight of what had transpired here. I understood that the curse was not a singular event, but a continuum, a chain that had been forged through devotion, fear, and desperation. And yet, despite its power, there was a vulnerability, an opening in the pattern, a place where the force's reach could be challenged. It required knowledge, patience, and courage to navigate, and I knew that by existing in this place, I had accepted the challenge willingly or not. By nightfall, I emerged from the basement, weary and hollowed by the revelations I had uncovered. The estate loomed behind me, silent yet pulsing, as if aware of the secrets I carried with me. I realized that the Blythe's story was far from over. The ritual's echoes would continue, shaping events, influencing those who came near, feeding on curiosity and fear alike. And as I walked the grounds, each step felt like a negotiation, a subtle pact with the unseen force that had governed the family's fate for centuries. I understood now that to confront such a power was not simply to uncover the past, it was to participate in it, to become a living witness, bound inextricably to the legacy of fear, secrecy, and unyielding obsession. The sun had long disappeared behind a thick veil of clouds when I returned to the Van Horn estate, the horizon barely distinguishable from the dense shadows that had swallowed the ground. Even after hours spent wandering the halls, piecing together fragments of the family's tormented history, the weight of their secrets pressed down on me, a silent, unyielding reminder that some truths were never meant to see the light of day. Every step I took on the gravel path leading to the main house echoed like a hollow warning, as if the very earth beneath me remembered the anguish of the generations that had lived and suffered here. It was a house that breathed sorrow, a structure whose walls had absorbed every whisper, every cry, every deceitful smile that had passed through its corridors. I entered through the heavy front doors which groaned under my touch, and immediately sensed that the house had shifted, subtly in my absence. Shadows clung to the corners like dark sentinels, and the faint scent of decay and wood polish mingled with the colder, sharper smell of iron that I could not place. My eyes adjusted to the dim interior, scanning the hall for anything I might have missed before. The family portraits that lined the walls seemed to follow my movements, their painted eyes glimmering faintly as if alive. There was a hierarchy in their gaze, the patriarchs observing judgmentally, the matriarchs silently weeping, and the children whose faces flickered in and out of focus, the brushstrokes capturing innocence tainted by tragedy. It was a gallery not only of likenesses but of destinies, frozen in oil and canvas, each one trapped in the same pattern of fear and secrecy. I wandered toward the drawing room, where the fire had long since died, leaving only embers that refused to warm the gloom. Here I discovered the remnants of what appeared to have been a gathering, chairs knocked over, papers scattered across the floor, and a fine layer of dust disturbed by something recent. Perhaps it was the wind, or perhaps the house itself had moved them, But I could not shake the sensation that I was being watched, that every action I took was catalogued and assessed by forces beyond comprehension. I sank into a chair that still stood upright. The leather cracked beneath my fingers, and allowed myself a moment to breathe. Though even in stillness, the weight of the Van Horn legacy was inescapable. From the corner of the room, a small wooden box caught my attention. It was simple, unassuming, but I knew instinctively that it was of significance. I lifted it from its resting place, feeling the subtle tremor in my hands, and opened it with care. Inside were letters, brittle with age, their ink faded but still legible. They were not ordinary correspondence. Each note was filled with instructions, confessions and warnings, documentation of the ritual that had cursed the family for generations. I read about vows taken in secrecy, promises that must never be broken, and the terrible consequences that followed when they... One letter in particular detailed a night when the eldest Van Horn son had vanished from his bedroom, his absence recorded with a chilling precision, and no explanation offered other than a cryptic notation. The cycle continued.
I moved deeper into the house, guided by instinct and the faint traces of candlelight that seemed to flicker without source. The hallways narrowed as I reached the older sections, the air growing colder, heavier, and more oppressive. I could feel the pulse of history here, a rhythm set by generations of fear and ritual, and it resonated in my chest like the echo of a long-forgotten drum. The floors beneath me creaked in warning, yet I pressed on, drawn toward the rooms that held the darkest truths. Behind one faded door, I discovered a study, its desk meticulously arranged, despite the years of neglect. Papers, journals, and ledgers covered every surface, each one filled with the meticulous handwriting of the Van Horns, documenting not only the daily life of the family, but the precise effects of the curse on each member. Reading these journals was an exercise in patience and fortitude. The curse had been more than a simple superstition or a moral tale. It had been executed with careful attention to detail, affecting the minds and bodies of those bound to it. Descriptions of sleepless nights, unexplainable illnesses, sudden vanishings, and inexplicable deaths painted a picture of a family trapped in a cycle of self-perpetuating torment. Each generation had attempted to break free, only to be drawn back into the same patterns, their fates seemingly written long before they had even been born. The house, I realized, had become a repository of both memory and malevolence, its walls impregnated with the rituals and the suffering of the Van Horns. As the evening wore on, the sense of being observed grew stronger. I turned at the sound of a floorboard creaking and found no one there, only shadows that seemed to twist unnaturally. The air was thick, heavy with an almost tangible energy, and I felt my heartbeat synchronize with the pulse of the house itself. I understood that the Van Horn's curse was not only about death or disappearance, it was about control, a force that extended beyond life and seeped into every aspect of existence. To enter this house was to acknowledge that some truths were too powerful, too persistent to ignore. I felt the weight of my own choices pressing upon me, knowing that by uncovering these secrets, I had in some way become a participant in their continuation. I moved toward the basement, where the final and most potent aspects of the curse had been enacted. The air was damp and oppressive, and the smell of earth and mold filled my nostrils. Here I found remnants of ceremonial objects, broken relics, and inscriptions on the stone walls, carved with a precision that spoke of both devotion and obsession. The rituals were not random. Each action, each symbol had purpose and effect, and together, they created a network of influence that spanned centuries. I traced the carvings with my fingers, feeling a shiver run down my spine, knowing that these marks were more than decoration. They were the record of power, fear, and inevitability. Hours passed in the cold, silent basement, as I documented, reflected, and pieced together the tragic history of the Van Horn family. Each revelation left me more aware of the fragile boundary between curiosity and obsession,
knowledge and an entrapment. The house seemed to pulse with life, with memory and intention, and I understood that its influence would persist long after my departure. Stepping back into the main hall, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and clarity, a recognition that the Van Horn story was far from complete, and that the house, in all its quiet, relentless presence, would continue to shape the fates of those who dared to enter. The chill in the air followed me as I ascended from the basement, each step heavier than the last, as though the house itself were reluctant to release me from its grip. The corridors seemed longer now, the walls closer, pressing in as though attempting to contain not just the living, but also the weight of every secret they had ever housed. I could feel it, an unrelenting presence, watching, waiting, almost breathing alongside me, and I knew that my understanding of the Van Horn curse was far from complete. Every shadow seemed to stretch with intent, every whisper of wind carrying echoes of voices long silent. The house was alive in a way that defied reason, a vessel for centuries of anguish, and I, a newcomer to its story, had become inextricably entwined in its silent, sinister rhythm. In the drawing room, the remnants of past gatherings still lingered. Chairs were overturned, a faint layer of dust settling upon them, yet they bore marks of recent disturbance, as though unseen hands had shifted them slightly. Papers lay strewn about the floor, the edges curled and yellowed with age, but the ink was sharp and legible, chronicling a family history both meticulous and horrifying. I knelt to examine one such letter, the handwriting precise yet desperate, detailing the emotional unraveling of a Van Horn child, the first of a new generation ensnared by rituals that had persisted for decades. The words spoke of fear, of strange compacts, made in the dead of night, of warnings passed, in hushed tones from parent to child, each generation inheriting not only wealth and property, but the invisible chains of a curse that demanded obedience and secrecy. The portraits lining the walls seemed to bear down upon me as I moved from room to room. The Van Horn ancestors gazed with unflinching intensity, their painted eyes following my every movement, recording, judging, and perhaps warning. It was as if the family had consciously imbued the walls with their collective consciousness, a silent council of eyes and expressions that watched over the living, ensuring the continuity of the curse. I traced my fingers along the frames, feeling the textures of time, the roughened brush strokes, the small cracks in the canvas, the slight give of age-weakened wood. Each portrait told a story, not just of appearance, but of hidden acts and consequences, a visual ledger of sins and sufferings that words alone could never capture. I found myself drawn to the study once more, where the journals had previously revealed so much. This time, however, my attention focused on a set of smaller, leather-bound diaries, tucked discreetly behind the main ledgers. They were different, personal, intimate, and far more revealing. Each page spoke of the mental toll exacted by the family curse, sleepless nights haunted by inexplicable visions, moments of uncontrollable rage, sudden fits of despair that left both children and adults debilitated. The entries documented attempts to break free, desperate efforts to resist the invisible force that had ruled their lives, and the inevitable failure that followed. The meticulous care in recording each incident suggested a family both aware of their doomed fate, and yet powerless to alter it. As the evening deepened into night, I wandered into the east wing, where the oldest sections of the house were located. Here, the architecture changed subtly, wooden beams darkened with age, floorboards uneven and creaking, wallpaper peeling and revealing layers of the past beneath. The air was heavier here, laden with a faint scent of decay, damp earth and something more elusive, almost metallic, that I could not immediately identify. The faint flicker of candlelight seemed to dance along the walls without source, casting shadows that shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that my mind struggled to recognize. It was a place where the past clung more fiercely, where the whispers of forgotten generations seemed almost tangible, brushing against the skin, murmuring secrets I was not meant to hear, but could not ignore. In one room, I discovered remnants of the family's personal belongings. Children's toys once brightly painted but now dulled and chipped. Delicate trinkets and jewelry. Some broken, others intact, but untouched for decades. I ran my fingers over a small music box, winding it carefully, and a faint haunting melody emerged, vibrating through the room, stirring memories long buried. It was as if the house itself were feeding me fragments of a life I could never have lived, compelling me to witness the cyclical suffering of the Van Horn lineage. The toys, the personal items, the very air seemed imbued with intent, carrying forward the legacy of trauma, ensuring that even those who had escaped its immediate grasp were never truly free. I paused in front of a large mirror, its surface streaked with age and dust. For a long moment, I saw nothing but my own reflection, pale and tense, eyes wide from both fatigue and revelation. Then slowly, shapes began to emerge, figures just beyond clarity, flickering at the edge of sight, moving in rhythm with the pulse of the house. Children, adults, ancestors long gone, all glimpsed in fleeting moments, as though trapped in a loop, repeating gestures and expressions of a bygone era. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and they vanished, leaving only the mirror and my own staring face. The sensation lingered, a reminder that the Van Horn curse was not merely a story of the past but a persistent, living force, capable of reaching across time to touch those who dared to observe it. Venturing further, I encountered the family chapel, a small, dimly lit space that seemed almost untouched by time. Candles, long since melted into hardened wax, still lined the edges of the altar, and faint inscriptions adorned the walls, carved with care and reverence. Here, the spiritual dimension of the Van Horn curse became evident, not merely a psychological or familial affliction, but a binding ritual, intertwined with faith and superstition, invoking powers that sought obedience and exacted punishment with precision. I knelt briefly, absorbing the weight of centuries of devotion and despair, the silence of the chapel broken only by the faint echo of my own heartbeat, and the distant groan of the house settling in its foundations. Hours passed unnoticed. I moved from room to room, documenting, observing and reflecting on the relentless continuity of the curse. It was a complex web of secrecy, superstition and human frailty, meticulously preserved by those who feared both its power and the consequences of revealing it. The Van Horns had left a detailed map of their own suffering, one that any outsider could follow yet could never truly comprehend without stepping into the shadows that had claimed generations. The weight of understanding settled heavily upon me, a burden as real and pressing as the oppressive air of the house itself. Finally, I retreated to the main hall, exhausted yet aware that my journey through the Van Horn legacy was far from over. Each revelation brought clarity, but also deeper questions. Each step forward illuminated the horrors yet concealed more than it revealed. The house, with its silent, omnipresent energy, seemed to hum with anticipation, aware of my comprehension yet withholding its ultimate truth. I understood that the curse was not a simple tale of misfortune, but a meticulously orchestrated, living entity, capable of shaping destinies, controlling behaviors and ensuring the persistence of its influence across generations. The night outside deepened into a thick, suffocating darkness, and yet the house itself seemed to pulse with a life more vivid than the world beyond its walls. I moved cautiously through the grand hall, aware that each step echoed against the centuries of silence, reverberating not just across the floors but within the very essence of the Van Horn legacy. It was as though the house remembered me, recognized my intrusion, and silently judged my every motion. I could feel its eyes in every shadow, its breath in every gust of air, and the weight of generations pressing upon my shoulders with relentless insistence. Returning to the West Wing, I noticed subtle changes that had escaped my attention before. The wallpaper bore new cracks, almost forming patterns that resembled faces twisted, distorted and agonized. I strained to see, to understand, but the patterns seemed to shift and morph as I blinked, evading clarity, and leaving me unsettled, uncertain of my own perception. The Van Horn curse was not merely a matter of superstition. It had a tangible presence that toyed with the senses, bending reality to its own mysterious design. Every corner, Every hallway seemed to vibrate with memory and intent, a silent chorus of suffering and expectation that refused to be ignored. In one of the side rooms, I discovered a collection of photographs, carefully preserved in a large, dusty album. Faces stared back at me, children with hollow eyes, adults whose expressions betrayed terror and resignation, couples frozen in poses that now felt haunted rather than joyful. Some photos were scratched, others smeared with age, and a few had markings in the margins, cryptic notes, symbols and annotations that hinted at rituals performed, promises made and consequences suffered. I turned the pages slowly, feeling as though each photograph was a window into a moment of history steeped in dread, a fragment of the puzzle that the Van Horns had left behind for me to piece together. The letters and diaries I had examined earlier now took on new meaning. References that had seemed isolated before began to align, creating a timeline of despair and strange occurrences, one that traced a path of deliberate repetition. Each generation of the Van Horn family had faced similar trials, yet with slightly altered details, small deviations in ritual, in superstition and secrecy, but always culminating in the same outcome, the inevitable unfolding of misfortune and suffering. It was a cycle that no human intervention had broken, a force beyond rational explanation that seemed to require both acknowledgement and participation to sustain itself. I paused before a fireplace, its hearth cold and empty, and noticed a small key tucked into the side of the mantel. Its presence was subtle, almost hidden, yet it felt deliberate, as though placed specifically for someone who had already proven their curiosity. The key was ornate, engraved with delicate patterns and symbols I could not decipher, but its significance was unmistakable. It represented access to something deeper, a portal into the most guarded secrets of the Van Horn lineage, the heart of the curse that had claimed so many. I held it tightly, a mix of fear and determination coursing through me, knowing that what I would discover next might alter not only my understanding of the family, but my perception of reality itself. Guided by instinct and the clues I had uncovered, I found a narrow staircase descending beneath the east wing. The steps were steep and uneven, each one creaking ominously under my weight. A chill rose from below, mingling with the scent of damp stone and earth, and I could feel the air grow heavier with each descent. It was as if the house itself was testing my resolve, gauging my willingness to confront the darkest corners of its history. I hesitated briefly, taking a deep breath, before stepping fully into the shadows, the dim light of my lantern flickering across walls, lined with inscriptions and symbols that seemed both ancient and alive. At the bottom, I discovered a hidden chamber, its walls etched with elaborate carvings depicting scenes of struggle, devotion and despair. Figures writhed in anguish, hands reaching outward as if seeking release or forgiveness. Candles, long burned down to stubs, left pools of hardened wax across the stone floor, and the lingering aroma of incense mingled with the earthy scent of stone. In the center of the chamber lay a small pedestal, upon which rested a collection of artifacts, a locket, a ceremonial dagger, and a folded piece of parchment that had yellowed with age. These objects felt charged with significance, imbued with the essence of every Van Horn who had ever lived, a tangible connection to the invisible threads of the curse.
I approached the pedestal with caution, reverence, and a growing sense of dread. The locket, delicate and tarnished, opened to reveal miniature portraits of children, their eyes sorrowful, gazing outward as though silently pleading. The dagger, though small, radiated a weight that went beyond its physical form, and the parchment, carefully unfolded, contained diagrams, notations, and instructions that revealed the full extent of the rituals performed over generations. The pages described actions meant to bind, to ensure compliance, to perpetuate suffering in the service of an unseen force. Reading them, I felt a shiver that ran not just along my spine, but through the marrow of my bones, connecting me, briefly, to the experiences of those who had lived and died under the Van Horn shadow. Hours passed as I absorbed every detail, mapping the connections between objects, writings, and the house itself. The patterns emerged clearly now, Each generation had been trapped in a carefully orchestrated web, one that combined superstition, manipulation, and psychological influence with physical reminders of consequence. The Van Horn curse was a multi-layered construct, designed not merely to harm, but to instruct, to enforce, and to ensure that knowledge and fear was passed down meticulously, generation to generation. Its power was sustained, not by myth alone, but by human participation, by fear and belief, by the unbroken chain of acknowledgement that linked past, present, and future. As I climbed back to the upper floors, carrying the weight of understanding, I realized that the Van Horn curse was not just a historical artifact or an isolated anomaly. It was a living force, one that required both witness and engagement to persist. I felt the house's presence intensify, as though it recognized my comprehension and measured the depth of my intrusion. Yet I also sensed an opportunity. Knowledge, once fully grasped, could offer a measure of control, a chance to break cycles that had persisted for centuries. But such power came with a cost: the confrontation with truth, the acceptance of responsibility, and the courage to face whatever remained hidden in the shadows. By the time I returned to my quarters, exhaustion had taken hold, yet sleep was impossible. My mind replayed every discovery, every letter, every photograph, every shadow and whisper. The Van Horns had left an inheritance, not of wealth, but of awareness, a burden as tangible as the stones beneath my feet, as heavy as the knowledge of what had transpired, and as inescapable as the history they had meticulously recorded. I understood that the next day would demand further exploration, deeper insight, and perhaps a confrontation with the very essence of the curse itself. A test, not just of intellect, but of resolve, courage, and the willingness to acknowledge truth that most could never face. The air in the Van Horn estate felt heavier than ever, as if every shadow in the house carried the weight of decades of unspoken truth. I had walked its corridors countless times before, but now in the late hours of night, each step seemed to echo in the hollow spaces where the past lingered, stubborn and unyielding. The walls themselves seemed to sigh, whispering fragments of conversations long forgotten, cries muffled beneath layers of silence, and the cold trace of despair that had defined the Van Horns for generations. I had come to understand that the house was more than a building. It was a vessel, a container for secrets too potent to release all at once. And tonight, for the first time, I felt the boundaries of that containment faltering. I began in the library, the room that had always drawn me back, with its towering shelves, lined with dusty volumes and yellowed letters. In the flickering candlelight, I examined the collection one last time, scanning for the papers, the letters, the evidence that had always eluded me. The air smelled faintly of decay, of ink and moth-eaten parchment, the unmistakable perfume of history hiding its shame. I pulled a volume from the uppermost shelf, its spine brittle and cracking beneath my fingers. As I opened it, a folded sheet of paper fell out, landing silently on the oak floor. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant yet trembling, as if the writer had been aware that their words would one day haunt future generations. It was a confession, written by someone whose name had been whispered only in fearful murmurs within the family. The letter detailed acts, so cruel, so selfish, and yet so human, that I felt my stomach twist in response. The Van Horn curse was not a ghostly force, nor a supernatural punishment. It was born of human failings, multiplied by secrecy, arrogance, and the unwillingness to confront truth. Every tragedy, every disappearance, every sudden death was a ripple from choices made in moments of fear, pride, or desire. And with this letter, the final pieces began to align, illuminating the pattern that had kept the family in a state of perpetual doom. I carried the letter with me through the hallways,
the candlelight trembling against the walls as I walked, revealing glimpses of faded portraits, whose eyes seemed to follow my progress. There was something almost ritualistic in my movements, as though I were enacting a ceremony of revelation, calling forth the spirits of those who had suffered, those who had perpetrated, and those who had simply endured. Each step brought a deeper awareness of the weight I now bore. I was not merely discovering history, I was inheriting it, becoming a part of the narrative I had spent years trying to unravel. And with inheritance came responsibility. The dining room, long abandoned, became my next destination. Its table still bore the scars of years of neglect, scratches and stains that spoke of hastily ended meals, arguments frozen in time, and the echoes of laughter that had long since vanished. I placed the letter in the center of the table, as if offering it as a tribute or a warning. The room seemed to shiver, the shadows shifting in response, acknowledging that what had been hidden could no longer remain so. I felt the weight of eyes upon me, and for a moment, I imagined the presence of the entire Van Horn line. Spectres of the past gathered to witness this unveiling. It was both terrifying and profoundly cathartic. Hours passed as I continued my exploration, piecing together fragments from journals, letters, and whispered family lore. Each revelation confirmed what I had come to suspect. The curse was cyclical, self-perpetuating, born from the failure to confront moral failure. Betrayal had been met with silence, secrets had been passed as heirlooms, and fear had become a legacy more enduring than wealth or land. It struck me that the family had not needed a supernatural force to be doomed. They had been architects of their own tragedy, constructing it brick by brick, choice by choice. And yet, amidst this bleak tapestry, I found strands of hope, evidence that acknowledgement and courage could break the chain, that the curse could end if someone dared to confront it. I paused at the top of the grand staircase, the letter clutched tightly in my hand, and looked down at the emptiness that stretched before me. The house, in all its silent, brooding grandeur, seemed to exhale as if relieved that its truths were finally being addressed. The walls that had once felt suffocating now seemed more human, their voices clearer, almost pleading. I understood that history could not be erased, that no amount of distance or time could absolve those who had lived and suffered within these walls. But recognition, honesty, and the courage to confront what had been buried could pave a way forward, offering a chance to those yet to come. I descended slowly, each step deliberate, mindful of the weight I carried. The house, despite its history, felt lighter, almost forgiving. The letter, now safely folded and placed in my coat, was more than a record. It was a testament, a reminder that darkness could be faced, understood, and ultimately overcome. I knew that my role was not merely to witness, but to preserve, to ensure that the lessons of the Van Horn family, painful, haunting, and profound, would be shared rather than repeated. Finally, I stepped outside into the cool night air, the sky above clear and vast, stars scattered like distant promises. The estate loomed behind me, formidable yet diminished, its secrets partially exhumed. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations lift slightly from my shoulders. The curse, as enduring as it had been, had met its reckoning, and the knowledge it had contained could now serve as a guide rather than a trap. In the end, the Van Horn legacy was not simply a tale of doom. It was a lesson in the power of secrets, the consequences of silence, and the enduring human capacity for both error and redemption. And as I walked away, leaving the house behind but carrying its truths within me, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow, relief, and determination. The past was never truly gone, but understanding it offered a chance to shape the future. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.